200 people watched a grown man shove my face into a wedding cake. 5 minutes before my daughter was supposed to walk down the aisle, Henry McCarthy grabbed my shoulder, grinned at the cameras, and shoved me forward. Frosting in my eyes, frosting down my collar. The room laughed. "Lighten up, old man," he said. "Wouldn't kill you to smile." It could have killed me. I have a pacemaker. Nobody in that room knew that except my daughter, and she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her shoes. That silence hurt worse than the fall did. 3 weeks earlier, none of this existed. I've run a hardware store outside Austin for 30 years. Same cracked parking lot, same bell over the door since '94. My wife died when Jessica was 11. I raised her alone after that. 6 days a week at the store, sold my truck twice to cover tuition, never told her how close we came to losing the house some winters. She called me on a Tuesday. "Dad, sit down. I'm engaged." I smiled before I even asked who. Then she said the name, Henry McCarthy, and I felt my smile hold a second too long. His family runs Sherman Capital, Highland Park money, the kind of family with a hospital wing named after them. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it. I wanted to mean it. Then came the part she'd clearly been rehearsing. "Dad, his parents are particular. Blaze and Priscilla care a lot about image. Just maybe don't bring up the store or the truck or how much you worked when I was a kid. Keep it simple when you meet them, please." I didn't answer right away. I looked at the photo on my fridge, Jessica in her cap and gown, paid for with a second job stocking shelves until midnight. "Whatever you need," I finally said. I hung up and stood in my kitchen a long time after that. That whatever you need cost more than I let on. 2 weeks later, at a dinner in a house bigger than my whole block, Priscilla Horn asked me sweet as poison whether I'd ever owned a home or just rented one my whole life. Blaze Sherman called my savings modest before I'd said a single number out loud. Henry laughed at every jab like it was written for him, and Jessica said nothing, not once. I sat through it, said little, watched everything. Nobody at that table knew what I'd actually built behind that hardware store counter, a stake in 3 companies most of Texas hadn't heard of yet, run through my partner, Patience Ingram, a woman sharper than every lawyer the Shermans kept on retainer. I didn't say a word about it, not because I was ashamed of the store, because I wanted to see how far these people would go before they found out who I really was. I didn't expect the answer this fast, or this public. Standing there at my daughter's wedding, frosting sliding down my collar, laughter ringing off the walls, I wiped my eyes and looked at Henry McCarthy. "You just made a mistake, son, and you don't even know it yet." He laughed harder. He wouldn't be laughing in 20 minutes because the coordinator, Quinn Cunningham, was already walking toward me with a look on her face I hadn't seen before, like something bigger than a cake was about to fall apart.
Quinn Cunningham reached me before I wiped the frosting off my glasses. "Mr. Price," she said, low enough that only I could hear it, "there's something you need to know before the toasts start." I held up a hand. "Give me 1 second. Because before I tell you what she said, you need to know what happened 3 weeks before that cake ever touched my face." It was a Saturday brunch at a country club outside Dallas, the kind of place with a dress code stricter than most churches. Jessica invited me last minute, almost like an afterthought. "Come if you want, Dad." I went because I needed to see how far this thing had gone. I was standing near the back with a mimosa I didn't want when a young man in a blazer introduced himself as Harper Lloyd, Henry's best man. "You're the famous father," he said, shaking my hand too hard. "Jessica talks about you all the time. Self-made woman, right? Grew up with nothing, worked her way through law school on grit alone, no safety net. That's rare in this crowd." I stood there holding my glass. Nothing. That's the word he used. Nothing. I'd worked 6 days a week at that hardware store since Jessica was 11 years old, sold my truck twice, once for her tuition, once for her bar exam fees, skipped my own dinners some months so she could eat at school without a reduced lunch card in her hand. And somewhere between that dinner 3 weeks ago and this brunch, my daughter had rewritten her whole story and cut me out of it entirely. Not hidden me, erased me. I found her by the dessert table 20 minutes later, laughing at something Henry said, his arm around her waist like a trophy. "Can I talk to you?" I asked. She stepped aside. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Harper thinks you paid for law school on your own. No help, no father." Her face went still. "It's not that deep, it's just easier." "Easier than saying my name?" "Dad, you don't have to answer. I just needed to hear it from you instead of a stranger." I left before the toasts, drove 2 hours back to Austin with both hands tight on the wheel, replaying every version of that conversation I should have had right there instead of walking away. That night, in my kitchen, I called Patience Ingram. Patience had been my business partner for 11 years, quieter than me, sharper than anyone the Shermans could hire. Together, we held stakes in 3 companies most people in this state had never heard of. I built it slow, on purpose, never touched it for anything flashy, never told Jessica the real numbers. I didn't want money to be the reason she loved me, or the reason she didn't. "I need you to draft something," I told Patience. "Talk to me first. Don't do this angry." "I'm not angry," I said. And I wasn't, exactly. I was something colder than that. I want to give her everything, but if she marries into that family, I want it to go somewhere it'll actually mean something, a fund for people who grew up the way she did before she forgot. Patience was quiet for a second. "You're not punishing her." "No," I said. "I'm giving her a mirror. What she does with it is up to her." We finalized it 2 days later. I didn't tell Jessica. I didn't tell anyone. Which brings me back to the ballroom, frosting drying on my collar, and Quinn Cunningham standing in front of me with that look on her face. "Mr. Price," she said, glancing over her shoulder like she didn't want to be seen talking to me. "The seating chart, you were never supposed to be in the overflow section. Someone changed it 2 days ago. I have the email." I felt something shift in my chest, colder than the humiliation from 5 minutes ago. "Changed it?" I repeated. "Who?" Quinn hesitated, and in that hesitation I already knew I wasn't going to like the name that came next. "Priscilla Horn," she said quietly. "She asked me to move you back, said it was optics." Behind us, Henry was already climbing back onto the small platform near the cake table, microphone in hand, grinning at the room like he hadn't just shoved a 61-year-old man wearing a pacemaker face first into 3 tiers of buttercream. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, swaying slightly, "one more toast." I looked at Quinn. "This isn't over, is it?" She shook her head. "It's about to get worse." Henry McCarthy climbed back onto that platform like a man who'd never once in his life been told no and meant it. "One more toast," he said, swaying, glass raised so high the champagne almost tipped over the rim. "Thank you all for coming. Isn't tonight something?" A ripple of laughter, nervous laughter, the kind that comes from a room that already knows something's wrong but hasn't decided whose side to take yet. I stood near the back, with frosting drying stiff on my collar, and Quinn Cunningham's words still sitting heavy in my chest. Priscilla changed the seating chart 2 days ago on purpose. I hadn't said a word to anyone yet. I was still deciding what kind of man I wanted to be in the next 10 minutes. Henry kept going. "You know," he said, voice thick with champagne, "not everyone in this room really works for anything, but Jessica, she clawed her way up, paid her own way through law school. Loans, grit, that's the kind of woman we respect." I felt my hands curl at my sides. Her own way. 2 truck sales, nights stocking shelves until midnight so she wouldn't have to take out as many loans. A father who ate cereal for dinner more nights than I'd ever admit out loud so her tuition check would clear on time. None of that existed in the story Henry was telling. None of it existed in the story Jessica had let him tell. Patience Ingram caught my eye from across the room. She didn't smile. She just gave me a small nod, like she already knew everything Quinn had told me and something more besides. Then Henry turned the microphone toward me. "Come on, Morgan." He waved me up with the same hand he'd used to shove me into the cake. "Come on, say something. Give the room a toast from the father of the bride, the mystery man in the back row." A few people chuckled. Somebody's phone came up, already filming. I looked at Jessica. She still hadn't looked at me, not once since the cake, not once since 3 weeks ago when she asked me to keep quiet about the truck and the store, and every year I spent making sure she never had to know what it felt like to go without. I set my water down on the nearest table. "Actually," I said, loud enough to carry, "I think I will say something." The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet right before something breaks. Patience Ingram set her glass down too and started walking toward the platform. Henry's smile was still on his face. He didn't know yet that it wouldn't stay there long.
I didn't take the microphone. I didn't need it. "I'll stand right here," I said. "Everyone can hear me fine." Henry laughed, unsteady on his feet. "Suit yourself, old man." I looked at my daughter first, not at him, at her. "Jessica, 3 weeks ago you asked me not to mention the store, the truck, the nights I worked double so you'd never have to eat off a reduced lunch card. I did what you asked. I kept quiet through the dinner where Priscilla asked if I ever owned a home. I kept quiet at brunch when Harper told me you built your whole life with no help from anyone. I kept quiet when your seating card got moved to the back row 2 days before this wedding on purpose by someone in this family who didn't want me seen." Priscilla's smile cracked at the edges. Blaze Sherman, standing near the head table, went very still. "I'm done keeping quiet," I said. Henry rolled his eyes at the crowd like I was the punchline. "Here we go." That's when Patience Ingram stepped up beside me, navy suit, briefcase still in her hand. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The room was already leaning in. "My name is Patience Ingram," she said. "I'm general counsel and managing partner at Ingram Price Holdings." Nobody in that room reacted to the name. Not yet. "Ingram Price Holdings," she continued, "acquired the majority stake in Crestview Regional Bank 14 months ago. Crestview holds the primary lending line on Sherman Capital's commercial portfolio. Every development loan, every credit extension your firm has drawn this year runs through capital we control." Dead silence. Somebody's champagne glass clinked against the table, and it sounded like a gunshot. "We" being, Patience turned toward me, "Morgan Price, majority partner, 22 years. Blaze's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Henry looked between his father and me, microphone still limp in his hand. That's not Dad?" Blaze didn't answer him. He was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time, which, in a way, he was. Priscilla found her voice first, thin and brittle. "This is absurd, some kind of stunt." "Check your own paperwork, Mrs. Horn," Patience said, calm as ever. "The refinancing you signed on your Highland Park property last spring. Same lending line." I watched it land on her face, too. I hadn't planned to enjoy this. I told myself the whole drive up from Austin that this wasn't about revenge, that I only wanted Jessica to see the truth clearly before she buried herself in a life built on people who thought nothing of her father. But standing there, watching Blaze Sherman's jaw tighten and Priscilla's hand grip the back of a chair, I won't pretend some old tired part of me didn't feel something settle. Henry turned to me, and for the first time all night, the grin was completely gone. "You're lying," he said. "You run a hardware store." "I do. 30 years, never once ashamed of it." "This doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," I said. "You just never bothered to ask." Jessica hadn't moved this whole time. She stood there in her wedding dress, hand pressed to her mouth, looking at me like the ground under her had shifted 6 inches to the left. "Dad," she said quietly, "is that true?" I turned to answer her, and that's when Blaze Sherman crossed the room fast, face red, and grabbed his son by the arm hard enough that Henry winced. "You," Blaze said, low and furious, not to me, to Henry. "You put your hands on that man in front of 200 people, in front of our Linda." Henry's face went pale a way it hadn't gone pale from the champagne. "Dad, I didn't know." "That's the problem. You never bother to know anything before you open your mouth." And that's when Priscilla, still gripping the chair, turned to look at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her once in 3 weeks of dinners and brunches and quiet insults. Fear. "Mr. Price," she said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss this somewhere private." I almost laughed. 3 weeks of quaint and modest and done what you could, and now, suddenly, private. "No," I said. "I think the rooms earned the rest of this conversation." Somewhere behind me, I heard Harper Lloyd mutter to another groomsman, "Oh, this family is finished." He had no idea how right he was, because Jessica had just stepped away from Henry's side, walked past her new mother-in-law, and was now standing directly in front of me with tears cutting through her makeup, about to say something that would matter more than anything Patience Ingram had just revealed. Jessica stood in front of me, mascara running, wedding dress dragging frosting-stained ham across the floor, and for a second neither of us said anything. "Is it true?" she asked, again, quieter this time, just for me. "All of it," I said. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want the money to be the reason you came home. I wanted you to come home because you wanted to." Her breath caught. Behind her, Henry was still arguing with his father in a hushed, furious tone. Priscilla had her phone out, already dialing someone, a lawyer probably, or whoever handles damage control for families like hers. Nobody was paying attention to us anymore. That was fine. This part wasn't for them. "You let them treat you like nothing," Jessica said. "For 3 weeks, I watched you sit there and take it. I let you see who they were. If I'd stopped it, you'd have never known. You'd have spent the next 40 years finding out one insult at a time." Her hands were shaking. "I told Harper you built your life from nothing. I let him believe it. I let everyone believe it." "I know." "You erased me." "I know that too." She looked past me, at Patience, still standing calm near the cake table, at Blaze Sherman, now on his phone, looking 20 years older than he had an hour ago, at Henry, who still hadn't managed to say a single word that wasn't some version of "I didn't know." "I don't want this," Jessica said, not loud, just certain. "None of it." She reached up, unclipped her veil, and let it drop to the floor. Henry noticed. "Jessica!" She didn't even turn around. "Don't. You shoved my father into a cake in front of 200 people and laughed. That's not a mistake I need explained to me." She turned back to me. "Can we go home?" I thought about the 2-hour drive back to Austin, about the store, the same cracked parking lot, the bell over the door that still rang the way it had in '94. About all the things that house never asked either of us to prove. "Yeah," I said, "we can go home." We walked out together, past Priscilla still on her phone, past Harper Lloyd standing frozen with a drink in his hand, past 200 guests who suddenly had a lot more to talk about than the seating dirt. Patience fell into step beside us at the door. "You didn't have to come," I told her. "I know. But you'd have done the same for me." Outside, the valet still hadn't figured out whose car was whose. Jessica stood next to me in the parking lot, wedding dress and all, barefoot, holding her shoes in one hand. "I have something else to tell you, in the car." She looked at me, wary. "Is it worse than tonight?" "No. It's a folder, about the will, about a fund I want you to help me run, not inherit, run. For people who grew up the way you did before you forgot what that felt like." She was quiet for a moment. Then, for the first time in 3 weeks, she actually laughed, small, wet, real. "Cereal for dinner and a hardware store, and you're still trying to teach me something." "Always will be. That's the job." We got in the car. I didn't look back at the resort behind us. The lights, the string quartet still playing to a room that had lost its reason to celebrate.
Jessica rolled down her window and let the night air in. "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me." "Never could. You're my why." The road back to Austin was dark and quiet, the way it always was that time of night. And for the first time in 3 weeks, the silence between us didn't feel like something either of us needed to fix.